This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
2. In connection with what I have just said, a footnote on atrocities. I have little direct evidence about the atrocities in the Spanish Civil War. I know that some were committed by the Republicans, and far more, they are still continuing, by the fascists. But what impressed me then, and has impressed me ever since, is that atrocities are believed in or disbelieved in solely on grounds of political predilection. Everyone believes in the atrocities of the enemy and disbelieves in those of his own side, without ever bothering to examine the evidence. Recently, I drew up a table of atrocities during the period between 1918 and the present. There was never a year when atrocities were not occurring somewhere or other, and there was hardly a single case where the left and the right believed in the same stories simultaneously. And stranger yet, at any moment the situation can suddenly reverse itself, and yesterday's proved to the hilt atrocity story can become a ridiculous lie, merely because the political landscape has changed. In the present war we are in the curious situation that our atrocity campaign was done largely before the war started, and done mostly by the left, the people who normally pride themselves on their incredulity. In the same period the right, the atrocity mongers of 1914-18, were gazing at Nazi Germany and flatly refusing to see any evil in it. Then, as soon as war broke out, it was the pro-Nazis of yesterday who were repeating horror stories, while the anti-Nazis suddenly found themselves doubting whether the Gestapo really existed. Nor was this solely the result of the Russo-German Pact. It was partly because before the war the left had wrongly believed that Britain and Germany would never fight, and were therefore able to be anti-German and anti-British simultaneously. Partly also because official war propaganda, with its disgusting hypocrisy and self-righteousness, always tends to make thinking people sympathize with the enemy. Part of the price we paid for the systematic lying of 1914-17 was the exaggerated pro-German reaction which followed. During the years 1918-33, you were hooted at in left-wing circles if you suggested that Germany bore even a fraction of responsibility for the war. In all the denunciations of Versailles I listened to during those years, I don't think I ever once heard the question, what would have happened if Germany had won, even mentioned, let alone discussed. So also with atrocities. The truth, it is felt, becomes untruth when your enemy utters it. Recently I noticed that the very people who swallowed any and every horror story about the Japanese in Nanking in 1937 refused to believe exactly the same stories about Hong Kong in 1942. There was even a tendency to feel that the Nanking atrocities had become, as it were, retrospectively untrue because the British government now drew attention to them. But unfortunately the truth about atrocities is far worse than that they are lied about and made into propaganda. The truth is that they happen, the fact often adduced as a reason for skepticism, that the same horror stories come up in war after war merely makes it rather more likely that these stories are true. Evidently they are widespread fantasies, and war provides an opportunity of putting them into practice. Also, although it has ceased to be fashionable to say so, there is little question that what one may roughly call the whites commit far more and worse atrocities than the reds. There is not the slightest doubt, for instance, about the behavior of the Japanese in China, nor is there much doubt about the long tail of fascist outrages during the last 10 years in Europe. The volume of testimony is enormous, and a respectable proportion of it comes from the German press and radio. These things really happened. That is the thing to keep one's eye on. They happened even though Lord Halifax said they happened. The raping and butchering in Chinese cities, the tortures in the cellars of the Gestapo, the elderly Jewish professors flung into cesspools, the machine gunning of refugees along the Spanish roads, they all happened, and they did not happen any the less because the Daily Telegraph has suddenly found out about them when it is 5 years too late.